In my coming soon video from a couple months back, I had promised some shorter videos to fill the void between main releases, and honestly that's an idea I've been toying with for quite a while. After all, there are a lot of games that I would love to feature that just don't fit my standard format, so I've been looking for a way to do lighter content highlighting the underloved gems that otherwise seem to have gone under the radar. And wouldn't you know it, just as I make that promise, a perfect example of that exact sort of game drops onto Steam with barely a whisper. An arcade roguelike with an abundance of style and extremely simple but utterly satisfying gameplay, Gamblor is a title that I could not for the life of me spend an hour and a half talking about. But it has demanded my attention nonetheless, so I do want to talk about it. The premise here is dead simple. Shoot the cans. If you hit them, they'll stay in the air, and if you hit them again, they'll rocket off screen. All you have to do is survive 30 rounds juggling cans and keep them from landing in the danger zone at the bottom of the screen. Piece of piss. But, as you can imagine, there's a lot more to it than that. And the beauty of Can Bullet is how exceedingly quick everything about it spirals out of control. First off, there's the pace. It's easy enough to handle at first, but within a couple of rounds, they're throwing an entire beer store worth of empties at you. They also don't just stick to the standard 355 milliliter, but start dropping bigger cans, cans inside of cans, angry rocket cans, charging sumo cans, ninja cans, and every 5 waves they'll sick a boss on you. Those bosses can be especially tricky, as with them, and some of the later game cans, you don't just have to worry about juggling them out of the danger zone, but also the placement of your cursor, as it can be attacked as well. Get hit or drop a can and you'll lose a heart, run out and it's game over. Add in stage hazards and just the sheer mania of it all, and your piddly little revolver isn't going to get you far, no matter how quick your mouse hand is. And this is where the upgrade system comes in. After every round, you'll be given the chance to spend the coins you've earned shooting down cans, and this is where the mad genius strategy of Can Bullet rears its head. While there are some bigger, objectively useful upgrades, like putting out a shockwave when you reload for example, the majority of things you'll see in the shop will be minor, just a % or 2 bump to one of your core stats, sometimes with a smaller drop as well to even it out. But these minor upgrades are really cheap, and you can keep buying them and re-rolling the store until you run out of coins. What this means is that you'll end up slowly and incrementally blowing up your core stats, those being damage, crit rate, crit damage, reload speed, and mag size, in very complex, custom ways until you end up making your gun into something utterly fucking ridiculous. Sure, 6 shots and a couple of seconds to reload may be inadequate at the start, but stick with it and your revolver will be holding 50 rounds of uranium tip, 500 Smith & Wesson, which will reload faster than the eye can see. It creates that glorious roguelike balance where you start off on the back foot, but through careful planning and a stroke of luck, become broken beyond belief by the end of a good run. Now, will that be enough to make it to the final boss on your first or even second run? Almost certainly not, but that's where you start engaging with this game's limited but very well considered progression. I wouldn't go so far as to call it a roguelite, as you don't really get more innately powerful with each run, but you will get more and more options to play with. And the biggest way this happens is with the other weapons. With each wave you pass for the first time, you get a crown. Get enough and you unlock a new weapon and a whole new set of crowns to unlock with it. For all intents and purposes, these are your characters in this game. And just like with any well-balanced fighter, none of them are necessarily better than your default Shotokan revolver, they all just play very differently. Starting with that revolver, it is the most basic and balanced firearm. All you have to do is point and shoot, it does good damage, but has a small mag and slower reload. The machine gun, conversely, has a massive mag and a decent crit rate, but lower per shot damage and takes even longer to reload. The shotgun only holds 2 shells and does average damage, but does that damage in a wide area and reloads relatively quick. The grenade launcher is explosively powerful, hitting a wide area, but it doesn't fire directly, instead setting rounds up from the bottom of the screen that stick around like mines when you miss. The bat does a quick spin on screen and is especially good at sending cans flying, but it only affects what the bat actually physically hits, and it needs to finish its swing before you can swing it again. The katana creates great big slashes and alternating diagonals, damaging a wide area very quickly, but being finicky to aim precisely and taking a while to reload, whatever reloading a katana would look like. The flame gun has a huge magazine and leaves temporary little fires on screen that do additional ongoing damage, but that's balanced out by an excruciatingly long reload time. And lastly, the charge gun requires you to charge it up to fire off a bigger, stronger blast, Mega Man style, rewarding timing and more strategic play. It's a varied roster, one that's not even half actual guns, which is weird when you consider the name of the game, but what makes each and every one of these weapons great is that almost all of their weaknesses and all of their strengths can then be accounted for or leaned into with the upgrades. Make Grandpa's double barrel hold 100 shells. Live out your weeby Zatoichi fantasies by forcing the katana to reload faster than you can click. Or just take that starting revolver and polish it into an absolute aluminum annihilating avatar of destruction. All you need to do is pick your favorite weapon and lean into whatever feels like the most fun, broken, or stupid build you can make. Ideally all three, and CanBullet will happily accommodate and then let you keep piling onto it. But even with all these new weapons, you're still not likely to see the final boss, an incandescent angelic tall boy, referencing that anime what everyone loves so much. But, thankfully, you've likely earned a couple of achievements by now. In standard survivors form, a genre this game does pull a lot from in terms of balance and pacing, each achievement earned comes with a new upgrade that can show up during play. These are often more out there as well, getting away from raw stat boosts and instead providing those bigger upgrades I mentioned, like companions or defense towers, letting you gamble coins or attack power for a bigger boost down the line, or allowing fundamental changes to how your attacks work, such as making it so that every shot before you reload does more damage, forcing you to prioritize mag size with your upgrades. Just like with the weapons, a lot of these aren't necessarily better than the other upgrades on offer, and they're balanced out by how much they cost and how rarely they show up in the store, but they can all feed into your unique, busted builds and make the dumb things you're doing with your weapon even more silly and overpowered when used correctly. It's with those weirder upgrades, alongside all the weapons, that constant feed of stat growth, and the unrelenting pace and variety of enemies, that it all comes together and creates that perfect one more run magic that make truly good roguelike and survivor games, I'm honestly not sure which genre I would place CanBullet in exactly, shine and be as addictively fun as they are. Even if you clear a run, you still want to play again just to see what other sorts of crazy builds you can make. Whether your next dumb idea will survive the initial gauntlet, and then if it succeeds, finding out if you can potentially break the systems even further and see just how over the top it can go. CanBullet is perfectly built to enable that kind of experience, and it does so in a very minimalist yet raw and joyously rough-hewn fashion. While it's not necessarily highbrow fun by any means, and it's not really the height of mechanical complexity, there is a surprising amount of depth and challenge in what's here, in a very unassuming, old-school Nintendo toy box sort of way. Even further selling that just plain fun vibe is the presentation, which to distill it down into a single word, I would call it scrappy. Every aspect feels put together in a very loose and playful sort of way, like the developer only had a rough initial idea for how they wanted CanBullet to look and sound, and then went digging through their scrap pile to put it together while trying to have the most fun possible during that process. That especially shines through in the audio, which is dominated by jazzy, copyright-free riffs, blown-out crunchy sound effects, and the developer's own voice, barking out weapon names in the game's title in overt, faux gruff English growls.
Combat, revolver, machine gun, shotgun, grenade.
It's a whole soundscape that has clearly been gleefully hacked together on the cheap, but still comes off as feeling consistent and considered. Those barks from the dev are an especially big treat here, as they're infectiously hammy and right from the title screen set the tone of casual, silly fun perfectly. Honestly, my only complaint with the audio overall is that it could have used more music. Each weapon gets its own core theme that plays on a loop when using it, and they start to get a bit tired by the time you get to the end of a run. Having an extra track per weapon that could come in when you're in the home stretch or something like that would have gone a long way to break up that repetition, as well as potentially raise the tension even further during those later waves. But it's far from a deal breaker, and the music is pleasant enough on the whole that it never becomes grating. The visuals are similarly simple but stylish, going for that not quite monochrome black, white, and red pixel style that's cropped up repeatedly in the indie scene over the last decade or so. Not to spin off on a tangent, but it bugs me that I don't know what the genesis for this style is, because there has to be some sort of connecting context that I'm missing. The first game I can think of offhand that used it would be Downwell, which was similarly a one-man Japanese indie joint, but it's popped up in a ton of games since then, and cast into that wider, the overall monochrome aesthetic has become more and more of a thing as of late, with games like The Return of the Obra Dinn, World of Horror, and more recently Cryptmaster using it to great effect. But CanBullet, Downwell, and their directly visually aligned kin feel more like they're trying to emulate a very specific aesthetic rather than just being in black and white, and I don't know what that particular style or source material they're basing it off of would be. Maybe it's stemming from nostalgia for some sort of ancient Japan-only PC graphics standard I'm not aware of. Or perhaps they're trying to emulate the rough, homebrew feel of old ASCII gaming. Or maybe it's even more simple and obvious than that, and the black backgrounds and stark, limited color palette are an homage, intentional or not, to old Japanese arcade games like Pac-Man or Space Invaders. I just don't know, and that bugs the hell out of me. Despite not being sure where it comes from, though, I can say that CanBullet uses this particular visual style masterfully. Some of the more complex games that go for this particular palette can end up looking a bit muddy, often delving into shades of gray to try to bring out more detail, but losing some of the starkness of the aesthetic in the process. CanBullet, on the other hand, leans all in on that contrast, and keeps its sprites relatively simple and its lines harsh so that everything really pops, and the same goes for its use of color. There's just enough red at any given time on screen to keep things visually interesting, without diluting the monochrome vibe, and it's used in a really smart way to highlight key UI elements that you need to pay attention to, like your cursor and the danger zone, as well as to make attacks more exciting and readable. In fact, that readability and the crystal clear feedback you get here seems like exactly why this aesthetic was chosen. With how CanBullet is designed, going black and white enhances the gameplay, rather than simply feeling like a stylish affectation. Just like with the audio, it feels like a scrappy but conscious and considered way to reach the goal of making this game as genuinely fun as possible to play. Obviously, I recommend you go get this game. I've done nothing but gush praise its way for more than a couple of thousand words at this point. The only real caveat I would add is that the amount of content here is a bit light. Once you've unlocked all the weapons and beaten that final Evangelion reference a few times, there really isn't anything else to do beyond unlocking any remaining achievements for new upgrades. Those upgrades can do some cool stuff, of course, but nothing that changes up the flow of things enough to keep you going ad nauseum. That being said, you're still likely to get a good 3 to 4 hours out of CanBullet, at least if you go for a solid run with each weapon at least once. My recording session for this video, which involved me wiping my save and then doing just that, unlocking roughly 75% of the achievements along the way, took me about 3 hours, and that's after putting in an initial hour and a half when I first checked it out, had a ball with it, and decided to make a video. Also, for what it's worth, that second run through the opening upgrades and weapons was just as fun the second time around, so it's definitely a game you can come back to and enjoy on repeated playthroughs as well. It's an absolute travesty as far as I'm concerned how pretty much no one has played this game, despite it being an utter joy. At time of writing, there are only a handful of reviews for it on Steam, and the player count is abysmal, which I do get as the dev is a bit of an unknown. It doesn't help that they didn't really do any marketing for this game as far as I can tell, and there isn't much of a presence for the developer on social. Surprisingly, CanBullet isn't their first title. After doing some digging, I found that they made some Japan-only mobile games that might not even be available anymore. The Japanese Google Play and App Stores are inscrutable at best. But CanBullet is their first worldwide release and their debut on Steam. Thankfully, we already know it won't be their last game, as looking at their publisher page, they already have another title in the works. Specifically, a funky-looking survival horror game which seems to be loosely built around the story of the Little Match Girl, which, yeah, color me interested in that. So with all that being said, let me reiterate. Go buy Can Bullet. While it's a lighter experience, it's also only $5 Canadian. Even less in currencies that actually matter. And you can't buy jack shit for $5 these days. God forbid that's more than you want to spend based on my word alone. It's okay, I get it. The dev was nice enough to put up an in-browser demo of the game on itch, so you can try it without even the commitment of a download. I've linked it in the description, so you got no excuse. Go enjoy it, and then maybe chuck the guy some coffee money, because Can Bullet is a damn fine little game. Well, that's my first crack at a video that isn't stupidly long for a change. Hope you all enjoyed it nonetheless, as I definitely want to highlight more odd ignored gems like this. That said, there are a couple of other formats I'm toying with for inner episodes like these too, and while they'll still largely be reviews or review adjacent, the subject matter will sometimes be less digging for treasure and potentially more digging up corpses. More importantly though, work continues on the big infernal cult classifications video as well, and if everything has gone to plan between when I'm recording this and when it gets published, I've already started work on the script for that at this point and am dutifully plugging away at it. That video is still a few months out at least though, so expect another small one like this to come out next, almost certainly to coincide with Halloween. Until then though, take care of yourselves and have a good one.